Hello, everyone. Bill, Britt, Cliff, David, Dawn, Doug, Drew, Grace, Ethan, Jay, Jen, Jessica, Gary, Lucas, Margaret, Mariana, Rick, Tina, Scott. Welcome, everyone. I know I missed a whole bunch of you. You're all coming in faster than I can say your name. So feel free, please, to throw your name down in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always great to see that, and always great to have people be able to connect a little bit through our NAMA webinars. So please, the chat is yours to use. Again, just a little heads up that during our webinar, obviously, I assume y'all will have some questions. So feel free to throw them into the chat. The best place to ask your questions is actually by using the Q&A function in Zoom. This allows us to track it easier. If you write it into chat, we might lose track of it. So if you really want to make sure that we get your question answered, throw it into the Q&A function. If you have a question that you need to speak out loud, we might be able to do that as well. But just keep in mind that we are working on a time schedule here, and we are going to be mildly rushed. So with us today, we have Spike, we have Gordon, and we have Wade. One of our panelists unfortunately could not make it, last minute problems. So Nicholas won't be joining us, but we will be filling his void with a additional recipe from our man Spike here. So some people here, we're just going to let people kind of jump in for a little bit here. So keep it a couple of minutes before we get going. Some people here, we got some Chet and Sue Sun from Oregon, Central Connecticut, Tina from Wisconsin, Pat, Virginia, Ginny from Gatineau, Quebec, represent in Canada, Brooke from Texas, Alice from Oregon, Taylor, Atlanta, Ria from Colorado, Ryan, Michigan, Sarah from Pennsylvania, Francis, Florida, Jen from Ottawa, Mariana from Mexico. The list goes on. You guys are coming in from everywhere. We're really happy to see all of you here. This, of course, is not our first webinar that the Culinary Committee has put on. Definitely not the first that NAMA has put on. The Culinary Committee is always happy to provide these webinars. If you ever have an idea for something that you would like us to talk about, absolutely feel free to even just throw that into the chat, and we'll make note of it. And we'll be happy to present these. We're always looking for ideas for things that would interest you guys, and so we can talk about it in future webinars. We do one probably about roughly every quarter or a few months. So yeah, let us know what you want to see and what you want to hear us talk about, and we'd be happy to do up some recipes, or sometimes we just do kind of panel talks where we just talk about kind of chef life and cooking mushrooms and foraging those mushrooms. So the world is kind of your oyster, so to speak, your pleurotus, as it were. All right, so we're a couple of minutes in. Like I said, we got a full slot of content for you guys, so I'm not going to take up much more time. Other people might roll in here. That's fine. Yes. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker here, which is Gordon Walker of Fascinated by Fungi. He's got his whole new book out called Passport to Kingdom Fungi, which is for pre-order right now. It actually gets released on April 22nd, 2025. Great Christmas gift. And inside of his book, he has the Mushroom Aroma Wheel, which is basically the basis for this entire webinar. So Gordon's going to talk a little bit about that, and I'll hand it over to him. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Robert. Am I good to share the screen? Let's see. Yes, I can do that. Cool. So I'm going to give you guys just a really quick intro on Aroma here. Let me get this in full screen. So my background, if I can get this to load up, is I'm a PhD biochemist, and I went to UC Davis. And I've always been really interested in aroma and flavor in particular. As a kid, I was actually aspired to be like a French nose, a perfumer. mostly because I found out that perfumers only had to work like 2-3 hours a day. And I was like, give me that job. That sounds great. But I've been fascinated by smells and the way they interact and kind of how we perceive them and how they can, spur memories and all this kind of thing. So I very much have viewed the world and a lot of my life through my nose, which I think is, I realize as I talk to other people that maybe other people don't see the world in that way. I think a lot of us are sort of familiar with, ooh, that's a gross smell, or ooh, I really like that. But I don't know how many people think about moving through the world and like clouds of scent and concentration and tracking prey and all sorts of stuff. But I think about it a lot. And certainly when I was in grad school and spent a lot of time, with my nose and a glass of wine, there was a lot of talk about, what are the volatile molecules in these things. I did some analytical chemistry in my work on yeast and understanding ecological interactions to look at, how sets of different volatile compounds were in wines that, had been fermented by yeast under different physiological states and stuff like that. But I had to learn a lot about smell and aroma at a scientific level, and that turned out to be really interesting when I got into mushrooms because I realized pretty quickly, as someone who lives their life through their nose, that mushrooms were full of lots of cool aromas. So coming from the world of wine, we have a lot of wheels full of descriptors for wine called aroma wheels that were originally invented by Ann Noble, who was a professor at UC Davis, and then my lab at Davis also put together a Britannomyces sort of wine spoilage aroma wheel, which was the opposite of the one where it's all positive descriptors. Ours was almost all negative descriptors. So don't hand me your homemade wine because I will pick it apart. Same with a beer, but I can give you great suggestions on how to make it better, but I might also be like, oh, this is like really phenolic and clovey and you need to like work on your sanitation or something like that. So beware when you ask me for feedback because I might not always be nice. But it's just because I've sort of trained to like pick all these flaws and stuff like that. So with shifting my attention to mushrooms full time, I was like, let's make a cool mushroom aroma wheel that gives us some language to discuss, how a mushroom smells. Because I think a lot of people lack kind of the fundamental terms to start describing it. So I basically made like a big word cloud and then tried to lump them into different categories, like fruity and sweet or chemical, something really stinky. And this is not scientific. I didn't base this on particular volatile molecules like a lot of aroma wheels are. This one is a little bit more um, holistic and kind of just put together on the fly with like what makes sense as these categories. But with what I put in the book, I tried to pick out a couple of compounds like sotalol or benzaldehyde that are common in other things, but also present in mushrooms. So sotalol is the lactone that's in sherry that smells like maple. It's also what's in maple syrup that makes maple smell like maple. It's in fenugreek and it's in candy caps. And we're going to have a demo later from Spike about doing some cool stuff with candy caps. Benzaldehyde is the one that smells like almonds. And so that is what makes almonds smell like almonds. And it's also in the prince and a couple of different agaricus mushrooms that have these very almondy aromas. So in a very general sense, odors have sort of a lock and key type fit in receptors that are in our nose. But it's not like an exact, receptor for each molecule. We have receptors that are sort of loose and different molecules can go in and hit those receptors. And so, one receptor hitting one or one molecule hitting one receptor gives you a smell, and another one hitting another receptor gives you a different smell. But if those things come in together, there might be some crosstalk that makes you perceive both those smells differently and generate a new third smell. And so this gets really complex when we're thinking about mixtures of lots of volatile molecules coming off of wine or, say, a mushroom, because it's really difficult to say, well, there's this one compound, but this one compound is supposed to smell like flowers, and instead this mushroom smells like poop. So the question is like, what, it's all about this concentration gradient stuff. Another thing I want to mention in terms of aroma is we perceive aromas and flavors very differently, whether it's orthonasal versus retronasal. And so orthonasal is when we breathe smell in, and retronasal is when we are sort of breathing out. And the majority of what we perceive as flavor is actually aroma. And we're much better at perceiving a lot of aromas on retronasal than we are with orthonasal. So you can smell in and think you're smelling something, but often you don't really get the full impact until you're kind of like chewing and breathing out. And if you think about it with like a cheeseburger, you can take a bite of a cheeseburger and it looks great, but you don't really taste everything until you're kind of chewing and you have that first big sigh where you're like, that's good. And that's when you're like, oh, there's the cheese, there's the meat, there's the lettuce, there's the onion, there's all that stuff. And it's all combining at once to make the flavor of cheeseburger. So anyhow, let's switch to mushrooms because that's what we're here to talk about. So, why do mushrooms smell? A big one is to recruit animals, and truffles are kind of like the classic example of this. They have evolved to live underground. Truffles are not a genetic category; they're like a lifestyle of mushroom, and every major family of mushroom has essentially a truffle form. And almost all of them stink to some degree or another because that's their whole life strategy is to essentially like, I'm no longer dependent on air currents to disperse my spores. Instead, I'm going to rely on animals to come dig me up when I'm ready to disperse my spores. And the classic thing is that, people think you hunt truffles with pigs. Most days, we hunt truffles with dogs. They're a lot more reliable. They won't like take a finger off if you were not quick enough with your hands grabbing the truffle away from the pig. But there are wild animals that go out and dig stuff up. But again, it's less like big megafauna things like pigs and other large animals, and maybe more stuff like insects or possibly small mammals like squirrels and rats, wood rats, rodents, and then also birds. So the vectors for spreading truffles around are much more diverse than just a pig, and I think that's a thing that we need to like help people recognize, and that most modern truffle hunting is done with dogs, which are again much easier to train and nicer to be around. Not that pigs aren't lovely, but they can smell kind of bad. Okay, so here's three nice smelling mushrooms, and there's lots of examples of nice smelling mushrooms, and arguably there's more, but these are three that I like that I think are great sort of like banner mushrooms to talk about. The candy cap, Lactarius rubidus, smells like maple, and when it's fresh, some people sort of say it smells more like fenugreek or curry. And again, I think that's like a concentration gradient thing, but technically this was published on by the founder of my club, Soma Jarvin Desharzer, who wrote a whole academic paper about analyzing what was in candy caps, and it's a quabalactone, but basically it gets dried out and oxidized into this sodalon compound when it's rehydrates a little bit. So they have this beautiful maple aroma with a nice heavy umami background. There's the Prince, which again is an agaricus, so related to like a portobello. But there's a whole section of agaricus mushrooms that have this beautiful sort of almondy character. There's even some that have a little bit more like anise fennel kind of thing going on. Then there's the Matsutake, Tricholoma, and there's different species east and west coast, but they are known for having this sort of cinnamon seafood. David Aurora's classic things like Red Hot and Gym Socks. And I think that deserves it a little bit because to me, there's a much more of like a floral, high note chemical aroma that I think is somewhat responsible for there's linalool in it. And linalool is a classic terpene that's in like, jasmine flowers and stuff like that. But it does have this sort of, Matsutake too can get a little older and a little funkier and a little more seafoody kind of thing. But there's a huge range of aromas, and I'm really interested because there's been some recent papers where people did like more analytical, deeper look at what was in there and trying to understand, well, there's these different compounds that smell like different things, but when we put them all together, that's, I guess, what creates the impression of a Matsutake on our senses. So here's some other interesting smelling ones. A bluet, common edible mushroom, whether it's Clitocybe or Colibia, I'm still up in the air with people and what they want to call it. But a bluet, great common name for it. And they, to me, supposed to people say they smell like orange juice or something like that. And for me, it's a very specific smell of like freezer burned orange juice, frozen orange juice concentrate. So if you've had orange juice at a cafeteria, that's kind of what bluets smell like. And they still taste a little bit like that to me when they're cooked. They're good in a cream sauce. I don't know if I like them in other stuff, but one of my favorite smelling mushrooms, and I saw that this past weekend up in Mendocino, is the cedar waxy cap. It's a Cuphophyllus, and it has this incredible, like, kind of terpenic, piney cedar aroma, and sometimes it's described as Russian leather. I don't know exactly what that's supposed to smell like, but it does have this sort of very interesting, like, tannic, phenolic, perfumey kind of character. And I've taken those before and put them in alcohol just to make a little bitters and smelled that through the years. It's really, really pleasant. And then there's like the, blue-green Clitocybe colibia that's supposed to smell like anise fennel. Oyster mushrooms have a lot of this aroma as well. And then there's plenty of mushrooms that just smell real bad. And this one here, the sulfur night, I think that's what it is. Oops. The sulfur night, I had never seen this before. At least I hadn't run into it and smelled it. But we smelled it in Mendocino a couple of times this weekend. And it was one of those things that just smelled so bad, like just awful. You got anywhere near it and you're like, oh, that is disgusting. It's mothballs, it's creosote, it's petrol. For me, it evoked being in a microbiology lab and you have this stuff called LB broth you grow E. coli on, and then when you autoclave it, it smells awful. And I was like, it smells like that. So I could just keep writing like, urinal cakes, negative reviews of how this thing smells. But then I kept going back to smell it a little bit more. Like when your BO's bad and you're like, oh, gross, that stinks, but you kind of keep smelling it a little bit. It's kind of like that. And it was a weird thing. And I'm like, I don't know why, as an animal, I keep wanting to come back to this thing because it's awful, but also I'm weirdly attracted to it. So again, leaves the questions like, do mushrooms smell to attract animals or repel them, or are they communicating with each other? We don't really fully understand. Um, the one in the middle, the stinky squid, pseudocolus, is one I've seen on the East Coast, and it is bar none probably the strongest smelling mushroom I've come across because they're tiny. But you can be like within 10, 15 feet of one and be like, God, is there a dead body? Like, is there a deer? Did a human die? Like, what is going on? Should I call CSI? And you're like, oh, no, it's just this tiny little stinky red mushroom that's covered in flies and slugs because they love those smells. It's a bunch of ketones and sulfur compounds that are just, most of the things that smell real bad, burnt rubber, garlicky dog fart, sulfur stuff are all various versions of mercaptans and sulfur containing compounds. And then you have the yellow stainer, the was it the Xanthodermus like agaricus section. That's David Aurora calls them the lose your lunch bunch because you'll vomit if you eat them. So don't eat them. But they have a very strong phenol smell, and phenol is an interesting one because for anyone born before 1990, if you say it smells like Band-Aids, you're like, oh yeah, of course, phenol smells like Band-Aids. And then anyone born after 1990 doesn't know that as a smell descriptor because they stopped putting phenol on Band-Aids. So you have to say, oh, it smells like a doctor's office or like, library paste or, phenols and scotch too. So if you're a scotch drinker, you're familiar with that kind of peaty character. But if you're cooking up a mushroom and it starts to smell phenolic and it's yellowing, like do not eat that because you're going to get sick. So sometimes mushrooms are a great indicator for helping you identify stuff as well and differentiate things. If your agaricus smells like phenol instead of almond, don't eat it. um, so there's a lot of cool new research coming out about this. I think there's some papers coming out of China and a few other places. People have been doing like truffle aroma projects for a long time, but I'm starting to see it happen more and more with like porcini and matsutake and just a lot of different mushrooms. Asia is much more interested to some degree than American scientists, but it's, the science has come along and there's a lot of cool info. It's still kind of hard to tell because there's so many compounds that it's really difficult to like point at one compound. Like this thing is responsible for the flavor and the smell of this thing. Well, that being said, like dimethyl sulfide is often the thing that is added to truffle oils to make truffles, truffle oil. They use like the tiniest piece of real truffle to say made with real truffle, but really it's just like an artificial flavoring of truffle. And that's part of why like truffle oil is so sort of one note and sometimes overpowering compared to like a natural truffle, which has like, think of like one guy on a poorly tuned guitar just wanging away on a corner versus like an orchestra of people playing instruments that are like really good at their craft. And that's the difference between like a truffle oil versus like a real truffle. The orchestra is the real truffle. The oil is the thing that's just kind of, whatever. So if you want to learn more about all this stuff, some suggested further reading would be this great guy, amazing book that was put together by one of my Davis colleagues, Ariel Johnson. And she goes real deep in a really accessible and easy, fun way to read, but like real deep into all of the different like categories of things that smell, how they interact. Her entire PhD was looking at Angostura bitters and then dropping out various components to see how that affected the perception. It was a super cool project. And there's also Nosedive, an amazing book on smell by Harold McGee, who's the author on food and cooking, which is to me like the Bible of food science. And he has an entire chapter on the aromas of mushrooms, which I probably should have read before writing my book, but I've only gotten around to reading it afterwards. But I had Hal and Ariel both give me a little bit of insight on what I put in my book. So anyhow, there's a quick review of smell in mushrooms and aroma and flavor. And now we're going to let the culinary folks take it away.
Thank you, Gordon. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And you kept the time.
Yay.
Appreciate it.
Once.
For anyone who's looking for more about Gordon's content, looking for his book as well, I posted his Instagram as well as his website into the chat. So feel free to click on that and go and visit. If you have any questions about the Aroma Wheel or anything that Gordon has talked about, please save it until afterwards or throw it into the Q&A if you think that you might be afraid of it. It is at the bottom of the video screen. It should be for most people, I believe. It just says Q&A, so click on that. You can post a question, and we'll get to it after we've gone through the presentations. So next up is a video. It's our only video of the night. Some of these recipes that we do, are just better to be done by video because we can kind of cut through time. So if anything, takes longer than 5 to 10 minutes, then a video is better. Now, some people have issues with video playing through Zoom, so we do post a link, so you can watch it yourself by clicking on the link that I'm going to be posting in the chat. But I'm also going to be sharing screen and playing the video through there. So whatever works for you works for us. And then so it's about an 11-minute video, and when that's over, we're going to come back and go to the next recipe. So this is Spike, who's been doing this video. So thank you, Spike. And the link is in the chat. I'll just share my screen here. I think this should work. All right. All right. Hopefully this works for everyone.
Some cinnamon, some nutmeg, a little bit of salt, butter, always lots of butter, brandy, red hots, and Matsutake mushrooms. So this is a relatively quick recipe and not many ingredients, so we should move pretty quick, and we'll get right on to it. So I'd like to start off with the mushrooms themselves. These are a type of tricholoma. They like to grow under pine. And I've already trimmed off the tapered bases, which are typically very sandy. So I trim those off while I like to inspect for any bug damage or anything that's unsavory. But what's fascinating about these mushrooms is that when you slice them in half, it releases their essence. And it has this essence of red hots. Oh, smells fantastic. Now, these are hot tamales. We'll get into that. I couldn't find red hots, but we'll focus more on that. So back to the mushrooms. We're going to be making some for the stuffing, and we will prep some for the topping. So I've sliced the matsutake into 1/4-inch slices, and I've also taken the edges and stems and diced them into pieces. So this is a candy called hot tamales. I went to 4 stores looking for red hots, which is a type of candy, and I could not find it, so this was a good substitute for me. The only difference is the shape of them. These are more pill-shaped. Red hots are more small nuggets. So going back to the recipe, I've peeled and sliced my apple, and I've sliced them about the same width of the matsutake, about 1/4 of an inch. And since I am substituting hot tamales instead of red hots, I decided to slice these up, and this will help them melt into the sauce that we'll be making. Here we're using 2 pans. Now, I mentioned that we have 2 processes. One is going to be for the filling of our matsutake apple crisp, and one is going to be for our topping of matsutake. So I can't stress enough, butter, 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 tastes so good. And we'll divvy this evenly into both pans. Now I've also set these pans on a medium heat because I do not want the butter to burn. And here, as I toss it around and coat the bottom of the pan, this will help everything else that we put in from sticking. Once our butter is melted, then we can start throwing in our other ingredients. So in one pan, we'll start with the sliced Matsutake mushrooms. Now, as I'm adding these in, I am kind of spreading them out because I do want them to sear evenly. And if they're stacked on top of each other, you're not going to get that nice brown. In our other pan, I'm going to take our diced Matsutake. And very similar to the slices, we do want to spread them out evenly because we also want to brown these in a similar fashion. Give them a nice toss and coat them evenly with the butter. And since that butter's hot, it's going to start cooking it from every side. Now at this point, I'm not worried about my butter browning or burning, so I'm going to turn the heat up to help speed up the process of browning these. And note, every time I toss these, I do like to spread them out so I can brown them evenly in the pans. Smells fantastic already. So after a few minutes, we can start getting this nice sear on our diced Matsutake in that bubbling butter as it continues to brown it. And same thing here with our sliced Matsutake. Here we can see the color that we're looking for, starting on the edges of these slices. Now, our sliced Matsutake, once we get our nice color sear on that, we're going to add our red hots, or here, in our case, sliced hot tamale candies. And these are going to help melt into the pan. I'm going to throw a dash of brandy in, and always a warning when cooking with alcohol, it can flare up. In our other pan with the diced Matsutake, we're going to throw our rolled oats in. We'll add some cinnamon. We'll add just a little bit of nutmeg and a pinch of salt. Here we can see those red hots are starting to dissolve in the butter and turn everything red in the pan. This is what we're looking for. Now, a side note with our topping, when you throw the oats in, be wary of any smoking and darkening. Here I've shut it off because I don't want to burn my oats. So I'm just going to set it aside until I can focus more time on cooking them. And in our pan with the red hots and the sliced Matsutake, we're going to throw our sliced apples in. And as we're adding our apples, we're going to keep this flame nice and hot, and we're going to toss them and coat them evenly with that red hot butter. And that's it. We'll cook that for a little bit. In the topping pan, I've melted more butter because those oats sucked it all up. I'm going to add my chopped walnuts and give it a nice stir. Here, note that I have the pan slightly off the flame a little bit because I do want to melt that butter. And I do want to pool the butter a little bit because I'm going to be adding brown sugar. We do want to liquefy this brown sugar, so we're going to press it into the melted butter, and we want to get it as loose as possible before we toss it into the rest of the oats. And at this point, everything's cooked and melted. We can shut it off and put it aside. And similar to our apples and Matsutake and red hots, once we have a nice toss on them, we can shut the flame off as well. Now, we don't want to cook our apples too much because they will fall apart and get soft. We will be baking this in the oven, so they will be fully cooked. So at this point, we're going to add some cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg, and a little bit of salt. Salt's just to help accent all the flavors. We give it a nice toss, and after everything's stirred in evenly, we can shut the heat off and remove it. And now we're ready to plate it before cooking. So here I have my oats, which are coated in butter, sugar, and the diced matsutake with the walnuts. Stir them evenly, nice and coated, because we will be baking this in the oven and we do want those oats to brown. I've grabbed a few small terracottas. Now, I've used 2 apples for this recipe, and I was able to make 5 portions out of this with my terracottas. So as I'm scooping them out, I do want to grab a relatively even amount of apples and mushrooms per terracotta. And here I'm taking all the stuffing that I have and distributing evenly through my 5 terracottas. Now, you don't need to fill these overflowing on the top. I do like a small layer of space between the rim of the terracotta and the filling that we're putting in. So I'm just going to gently press it down and make it evenly on the bottom before I start adding my topping. And here we have our matsutake oat topping, and we'll just grab handfuls of this and generously place it on top. Once we evenly get the topping on top of our terracottas, it's about time for us to throw these in the oven. Right here, I'm just picking out some more of those mushroom pieces because matsutakes are a very revered mushroom. We don't want to leave any in the pan to waste. So here's my oven. I have it set to about 350 degrees, and I am going to take my apple crisps and matsutake crisps and place them in the oven, close the door, and I'll check on them in about 8 to 12 minutes. The rolled oats will take about that amount of time to brown, so we'll check the clock, time it, so we know when to pull them out of the oven. This is an example of our nice toasted rolled oats, and we do want to put it on an underlining plate because those terracottas are very hot. Here I've garnished it with whipped cream and mint, and that's it. Bon appetit!
Thank you so much, Spike. It was a wonderful recipe. I would love to eat that. For everyone who is watching, I have just put onto the chat Spike's Instagram and YouTube channel. So if you would like to check out any of his other recipes, Spike is always participating in our webinar. He has tons of recipes that he's put online. So feel free to check out his YouTube or his Instagram and find more information there. So thank you again, Spike. Spike will be giving one last presentation to round out this webinar before we go into Q&A a little later. But first, it is my turn to give you guys a little slow cooker hot chocolate recipe. So this is a pretty easy, straightforward recipe. It's done in a slow cooker, so you really don't have to care too much about, burning is just the concern usually with chocolate. Anything that you're doing is have a pot with chocolate, you're likely to you have a high risk of burning it. And so in a slow cooker, you have a pretty good chance of avoiding that problem. And so I enjoy making my own hot chocolate at this time of year, and throughout the year. I throw it into a thermos, and when I go hiking in the winter, then I take a little thermos of hot chocolate, find a nice peak at the top of a mountain, get a nice view, and enjoy a nice cup of hot chocolate while at the top of the mountain or something. So this one is the Pioppini version. So Pioppini is has multiple common names like a lot of other mushrooms. I was not fully familiar with this mushroom. It's commonly called just a poplar mushroom, black poplar mushroom, poplar field cap, and then just Pioppini. I believe its Latin name, though, of course, like most, it kind of has a whole bunch of synonymous names, but Cyclocybe gerita, I believe is the name. So is that right, Gordon? Yeah, more or less. Okay, great. So in terms of aroma, and the reason why I'm using this mushroom for the hot chocolate recipe is actually because it kind of has a mild kind of nutty, kind of a little spicy, kind of like a little peppery, but also like a little sweet. So kind of when I was looking at Gordon's aroma wheel, it basically covered the 12 o'clock range of the aroma wheel. So it was all the top. It avoided the acidic and not too yummy ones, but it covered the a little sweet, a little peppery, a little nutty, and really when you're looking for a hot chocolate, that's kind of what you're going for, right? I mean, you're going for, classic hot chocolate had chilies in it, right? So a little peppery is fine. Sweet, obviously, kind of makes sense with a hot chocolate, etc. So Pioppino seemed to fit well with this recipe. So without further ado, I'm going to get into it. So it's very simple. There's only 5 ingredients really in this recipe. So first is milk. So the downside of a slow cooker, I guess it's well, it depends. The silver lining in a way. You have to make a lot. You can't really make 1 cup in a slow cooker. So this is a recipe that will make about a dozen cups of about 180 milliliters. You don't need to take notes on this. I believe this was the recipe that I put into the microfile. So if you haven't already looked at the microfile, great gift guide, etc. That's all in there. I highly recommend you go to the NAMA website, check out the microfile issue, check out the gift guide that's in there, and there's a whole bunch of recipes in there as well, and this is going to be one of them. So without further ado, we got our 2 liters of milk. Now I'm using whole milk. I like to keep things fatty. I'm a chef. What can I say? If you, by all means, you can use 2%. You can use skim. In my opinion, it's not going to taste as good, but you can offset some of the calories that are going to be associated with this. And you can also, if you don't like milk, you can go ahead with almond milk and the other things to your heart's content. So, chocolate chips. So I'm using chocolate chips. You don't have to use chocolate chips. They do melt really quickly. If you're using, bar like Baker's chocolate or something like that sort, you're going to have to cut it up really fine. But chocolate chips work absolutely just fine. You're going to want about 350 grams of chocolate, of semi-sweet chocolate. This quick. So there you go. Chocolate in. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Next up, sugar. So I'm using vanilla sugar. You can, by all means, replace. So I make my own vanilla sugar whenever I use vanilla beans. I just toss them into a little bin and add in a whole bunch of sugar. It will absorb all the flavor of the vanilla. So there's no reason to throw away the vanilla beans. And you can honestly just keep topping this up until you no longer smell any vanilla. I've had these vanilla beans going inside of this bin now for probably a year. I open it, I immediately get smacked in the face with vanilla. So don't throw it away. Don't throw away a vanilla bean ever. That's sacrilege. Just top it off with sugar and you'd be good to go. So that's for your vanilla sugar. You can also just buy straight up vanilla sugar. You can also just use sugar and add vanilla extract. Honestly, I would have no idea what the quantity is of vanilla extract. I would probably put in, I love vanilla, so I'd probably put in 2 to 3 tablespoons of vanilla extract, but that's probably too much for most people. Anyways, for sugar, 120 grams. Keep the vanilla beans out. Don't do as I do. 120 grams. And that can go inside as well. Easy. Now, next we got cocoa powder. I generally would recommend to people for, you probably don't use cocoa powder super often. And, if you do, then you're a big baker and you might not know this already. But there really is a best cocoa powder. And this is the best cocoa powder. It is a Dutch cocoa powder. I highly recommend that this is the one you get. It just has a much stronger flavor, but it's not overly coarse flavor. It is the one that I use all the time, and that's the one I would generally recommend to anyone. So you don't have to. You can use whatever cocoa powder you have at home. Feel free. But if you want to really get a solid chocolate flavor without a sort of any background bitterness and stuff like that, then this is really the one you want. So use 50 grams of this. Now, in this case, in this time, we're not going to be putting the cocoa powder directly into the slow cooker. We're actually going to add some of the milk into it and whisk it in. I'm getting cocoa powder everywhere, guys. You don't even know. This is not coming out easy. All right. There we go. There we go. Whoop. Okay. Well, I got 65 grams, but I'm not putting it back in. So we're going to have an extra cocoa-y cocoa. All right. With that in mind, we're going to add some of our milk in here. Just want to add enough so that we can get a good whisk of that cocoa powder. We don't want to put it directly in because then it might get clumpy, and we really don't want it to get clumpy in there. It's going to be a lot harder for us to work out those clumps after the fact. So just add in some milk, add in the cocoa powder, give it a whisk, get rid of all of the lumps that you can. And then after that, that's when we add in the slow cooker. In this case, mine is turning, it almost looks like just like cocoa powder or cake mix. It's pretty thick. That's fine. Again, probably going to add a touch more milk just to make sure that I do have all the lumps out. But if you look at that, it's kind of like, well, like cake batter. Add a bit more. It doesn't really matter how much milk you put in now because the entire 2 liters is going to go into the slow cooker, so it's not that big of a concern. We just want to have enough to make sure that there are no lumps. And then once you're content and everything looks nice and smooth, then, like everything else, I'm just going to add it directly into the slow cooker. I forgot my spatula, but before I turn this on, I'm going to be grabbing my spatula and getting all the rest of that delicious chocolate out. So that's in there. And then last but not least, our powder. So this is a freeze-dried Pioppini powder. You know, like I said, there are probably other mushrooms that you can utilize for this dish, but this one, because of its sweetness, pepperiness, nuttiness, this is the one I like to use. We're looking for about 30 grams of freeze-dried, which seems like quite a bit, but honestly, because of all the cocoa powder, it really kind of just comes in mildly. So a lot of people are very concerned that they don't really want to be drinking, you know, mushroom. They want to have the hot chocolate. This is hot chocolate forward, but you do get that a background taste. The people who've known that it has mushrooms can taste it. People who don't know that it has mushrooms and don't like mushrooms can't taste the mushrooms. They just don't tell them that there's mushrooms in it, and they have no idea there's mushrooms. So it's subtle enough that people who don't like mushrooms won't complain. So that's great. That's always good. One thing I've noticed though is even if it's freeze dried, so this looks like it looks pure, like pure powder. But I've used this directly into it and I get all these clumps of mushrooms. And then people who don't like mushrooms do know there are mushrooms. You can't really get over the bits of mushroom that come into your mouth when you're drinking. And it's not appealing. The texture is not great. So grab yourself a good strainer and just put this. I already measured this, so but put it through a nice strainer and make sure that you get out any bits that are going to grow into, you know, mushroom bits inside. You don't want that. What I normally do is with all the little bits that I have left, I just put it inside a mortar and pestle, grind it down, and then run it through the strainer again, and it's usually good to go. All right. So you probably can't see that in there, but in there, I filled up this little scoop. It's probably a half cup that's in there. I still have probably about a quarter that's in there that is still just bits. So you imagine all of that getting rehydrated and spreading out and filling all your cups. It's too much. So just the powder, make sure you strain it properly. And then from there, you just add in the rest of your 2 liters.
Robert, when did Canada start having milk in cartons instead of bags?
You know, because Wade brought it up in our last meeting, I went to the store and considered buying bagged milk. Just for you
I
guys.
thought that was the whole thing about Canada having, milk in a bag. But there you are with a carton. You're blowing my mind.
We do have it in a bag, but we also have the cartons. I don't buy the bagged milk, so I was like, what am I going to do with all this milk if I buy it? You can only buy it in like 6-liter packages. I don't need 6 liters of bagged milk. So it is what it is. So that's all in there now. Give it a nice good stir. Make sure that you're incorporating all that mushroom powder, that you're incorporating that chocolate sauce, if you will, that you created. And then from there, what I normally do with almost all of my slow cooker recipes, honestly, if I can help it, is I start off on high, maybe for just the first 30 minutes or so, and then I drop the temperature down to low and let it finish off. Usually what happens is you'll see a lot of recipes that will say, you can run a slow cooker on low heat for about 8 hours or 8-9 hours. You can do it on high heat for 5 to 6 hours. What I find is if I just do 30 minutes on high heat for a bit, I can knock off about an hour and a half on my low temperature. So that's typically just how I do it. So I would start this on high, unless I was walking out the door to go to work or something like that, then I would just start on low and it would go for 8 hours. It's ideal if you don't just leave. I know the benefit of a lot of slow cookers is that you can just kind of leave it and go. But because it is chocolate, because there's heat in there, it is best to come once in a while. It can only be like once every 2 hours is fine. But to come in and just scrape the bottom and stuff like that and just make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom. I rarely have any problem with it. But just to be safe, you might want to be able to do that. And because of the magic of power of TV, I can fast forward in time. So here's my thermos. I'm not on a hill. I'm not overlooking anything, but here we are anyways. So we're going to pour ourselves a cup of hot chocolate. Super creamy, super dark, super delicious, mildly mushroomy. No hot chocolate is good without some marshmallows thrown in. Of course, if you have whipping cream, if you have candy canes, if you have whatever your jam is, feel free to throw it in. I'm going to throw in just a few peppermint sprinkles, and that's mine. So that's my hot chocolate, guys. If you have any questions, of course, put it in the Q&A, and bon appetit. What are the measurements for the ingredients again? I see that as a question, so I'll just quickly answer it. 2 liters for milk, 350 grams of semi-sweet chocolate, 120 of vanilla sugar, 50 grams of Dutch cocoa powder, and 30 grams of freeze-dried Pioppini powder. And that's mine. So thank you for that. Next up, thank you. Next up is Wade. I'm going to post some information from my website and Instagram in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to hand the microphone, if you will, over to Wade, who's going to be making us a sweet and savory mushroom caramel, reishi and cordyceps. So that'll be fun. All right, go ahead, Wade. You're on mute. You can unmute.
Can you all hear me?
We can.
Woo! So I gave Robert a link to a really great Amazake recipe. It's very thorough, which I generally am not. So, but it's a really great beginner's recipe. And to that, you'll add a tablespoon or two of dried cordycep powder or dried reishi powder or whatever mushroom you want to add. But you add it at the start of the process. And so you make your amazake, and then once it's done, you cook it over medium heat until like you reduce it into a caramel, and it's a really neat it's a neat build because it's no added sugar. So it's one of my favorites for giving my child who's in his trash era, like trash food era. So I can make him like really decadent desserts that he thinks he's getting like, hostess level sugar, and it's not. Um, but so like I pre-made um a cordycep and a reishi caramel, and um I did it a different way, but it's like a 7-step extraction process. Like it's not um the amazake will give you more than enough flavor and aroma uh as something you could do at home. But this is the uh cordycep caramel, and this is the reishi. And so I've got like a bowl. This is some reishi that James from Performance Fungi sent me. Um, and if you saw me like huffing bowls earlier, I was smelling these just to kind of like get a um, a better handle on what it smells like as per Gordon's wheel. And the fresh reishi for me, it's it's just pungent, little woody. It smells like a doctor's office to me. That's totally fine because it is, hyper medicinal, but it's not something. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to eat uh fresh reishi. It is something, man. That's like a one and done. I probably won't do that ever again. Um, but then if you put, like, say you put this reishi through that caramel process, it comes out looking like this. Like this is individual, like, and the texture of it is more like um, the licorice in Europe. Like it's a lot. It still has that chewy affectation because it's basically wood adjacent. But I'll eat these all day. Fully candied. The flavor, like the flavor is more chocolate, and the aroma is more coffee, which is super neat. Because those are two things that I would never associate with reishi. So I guess my whole thing is that I use sugar, or I use sweetness and heat to pull out the astringency, the bitterness of something to make it palatable for me. Because some people like it, they like the sawdust, woody, doctor's office, whatever. That's not my bag. This is more what I'm into. And then same thing for cordyceps, fresh cordy's. It's like still it's a little bit woody, like sawdusty. It has a little bit of sweetness to it, but not like this. Um, this is it in the jar, and it's super thick. Like I can hold this like this for a minute, and it's not going to move. Um, but uh, but yeah, and then like in this state, again, it's like it has, ironically, given that it's a caramel, it has a caramel scent and like almost like a butterscotch kind of thing going on, and things that I would never ever in a million years associate with cordyceps. Friends of mine that have had it said that it tastes like that goo that you eat on marathons, so that's not ideal. But that was like one person out of 500. But but yeah, and then Gordon said to mix each of them with like different liquids, and all I had with like on me was some mandarin orange, and it's neat because the acidity. I'm not just smelling the mandarin, which is usually like it's a pretty dominant scent, but it's just I'm getting like pine, like from the reishi, I'm getting pine scents, and like a lot more of that woody affectation that I don't get from the literally caramelized version. And then the Cordycep, it still kind of rings more within its the same aromas, the caramel. It's like a chocolatiness. Um, it's spice. It has like a black pepper aroma. I don't know. It's just me. And again, like that's just me. It's like that Harry Potter thing. You take that potion, and some people smell cut grass and toothpaste or whatever, and I'm like totally different on that spectrum. But so yeah, and I mixed it like I put it in. So I've got things with like acidity. I've got kind of like I made some uh, banana chips that I cured with truffle powder, and those have a neat earthy aroma in itself. So I've got some chocolate in a double boiler that I'm covering those in chocolate just to kind of like see if that fat changes the aroma of the caramels. But anyway, so like this is just kind of showing you like what is possible with the caramel should you choose to make it. Um, but yeah,
Is that it, Wade?
yep.
That's
Very-
it. All right.
Very cool.
Lovely.
Thanks for taking my suggestion. It was really interesting to hear you talk about like that dilution effect, because that's I was talking about at the beginning. When you have aromas in something that are extracted, they're really concentrated, but as soon as you spread them out a little bit, more stuff essentially gets forced out of solution, so things smell stronger. And also you change the reception there, because an aroma compound at a high or lower concentration can be perceived totally differently. And then you're also talking about like the synergistic entourage effects of adding other terpenes like from the mandarin, and then how those things are overlapping and affecting your sensory perception. So that was great. Thanks, Wade.
Yes, sir.
Again, like for everyone else, if you're interested in seeing what Wade is up to these days, posting his Instagram and his website online on the chat. So please go visit that. Fox Among Bears. And for our final recipe of the evening before we enter the Q&A, again, a little reminder, please feel free to post any questions into the Q&A. We'll be happy. We have about 30 minutes, more or less, after the presentation, answer any of your questions. And they don't have to be directly related to any of these recipes. It could be about the Aroma Wheel. It could be about anything that basically has to do with cooking mushrooms. We had a webinar a couple of months ago where that was almost entirely the webinar. Half of it was Gordon, and the other half was basically just questions, random questions. So feel free to ask any of those questions. And Brooke is posting about the microfile in the chat as well. Be sure to go check that out. A lot of effort and a lot of work goes into those. So they are catered to you guys. So please check them out. So without further ado, Spike is going to be giving us an impromptu recipe. As noted, one of Culinary Committee's members, Nicholas, suddenly couldn't make it for the webinar, which is unfortunate. He was going to be doing some candy cap doquitos, kind of like an eggnog from, I believe, Puerto Rico or Caribbean, anyways. But unfortunately couldn't make it today. So Spike decided to jump in last minute, save the day, and is going to be doing some candy cap creme brulees instead. So without further ado, Spike, take it away. You're on mute, by the way.
Unmuted. Hear me just fine?
You're great.
All right. So hi, everybody. Happy December. Happy solstice coming up. So I'll get to it to save some time. This is going to be a candy cap creme brulee. So, all right. Let me go over some of the stuff that I'm going to be using today. We have some candy caps, and I actually picked these up at the big NAMA foray back Halloween weekend from Gordon Walker. And I can tell you that these are really potent in flavor. I'll give you that much. Me on the East Coast, I'm just blown away by these things. So I'm going to start with about 6 small dried candy caps. I also have 1 cup of heavy cream. This is a 40% cream right here. 4 egg yolks, which I've already taken out of the shells and separated from the whites. We have 4 tablespoons of granulated sugar. This looks like a little brown because it is a Domino product they call Golden. It's just a little less processed, but it's the same thing as white granulated sugar. We're also going to be using a pitcher, a rubber spatula, water, a small sauce pot, mixing bowl, whisk, another mixing bowl, mesh strainer. Oh, we are making creme brulee, so we do have a torch to finish it off. I have a glass, I call them pie tins, but it's made out of glass, and also a cookie sheet underneath. And over here, we'll get into, this is candy cap infused sugar. Similar to Robert's method with the vanilla beans, I'm doing a same concept with the leftover candy caps from this recipe. So you may not have these now, but if you make this recipe, you can start your own. So we'll get into that. And then the final thing, a metal spoon. All right. So to start this, we want to scorch our cream. So what we want to do, we're going to add the heavy cream into the sauce pot, and we're going to throw our dried candy caps in. We will turn this on high, and we just want to scorch it. So as it heats up, it'll start to bubble, and then it'll start to really bubble and start to overflow. Once you see that, you can remove it from the heat, and then we're going to let it cool. While we're at the oven, I am going to set it at a convection, which means no fan, no circulation, at 300. All right, so I have that hot, ready to go. And while our cream is scorching, we're going to cream our egg yolks. So with the stainless steel bowl and a whisk, we'll throw our 4 egg yolks in. We do have our 4 tablespoons of the sugar, but since I do have some candy cap infused sugar, I do want to add extra flavor. And we'll add that in. And we're going to whisk these together. Yep. So, a chef tip, when you start whisking things and you see your bowl starting to spin a lot and you have something in your other hand, which happens a lot in the industry, put it on a towel. It'll prevent it from the bowl moving around too much for you. And we really want to dissolve all this sugar in the best we can and go a little bit beyond. So you'll notice as the sugar blends into the egg yolks, it'll get less grainy and less grainy. And you can whip this and whip this and whip this. And that's about all we want to do for this step. Then we're going to go check on our heavy cream. Now, when this has heated up and scorched and bubbled over, we're going to remove it from the heat. We are going to strain it into that glass pitcher. Oh, I forgot to add the step was you can let this sit and cool a little bit. We never want to add a hot liquid like heavy cream to egg yolks. So we can temper it if it's a little hot, but feel free to cool this and let those candy caps sit in the cream as it cools down. I typically drop it below 110 degrees Fahrenheit, so I don't, scramble the egg yolks by adding too hot of things. So what do we mean when we temper? We may add one hot thing to something that's cold. So we just start with a little bit and blend it in. And this is going to help elevate the temperature of the egg yolks without cooking it too much to where they turn into scrambled eggs. And then you add just a little more after that. And once you balance those temperatures out, you can add the whole thing right in and whip this together. So right here, we have that heavy cream that's infused with those candy caps, the egg yolks, and the sugar. Once this is mixed together, let me go to this step real. So here's the candy cap. Gordon Walker just mentioned it. So I don't want to throw these things out. These things are reusable. So what I like to do is I like to rinse them off. And for this dish, going back to that infused sugar that I have a Tupperware here with some candy caps that I've already cooked. And I'm just going to put those wet candy caps right in, toss it with sugar, and you'll notice how the sugar is going to absorb all that moisture. And if it starts getting a little too wet, just keep on adding some sugar into it, toss them together, and this will help dry and also help preserve these mushrooms as that moisture content leaves them as the sugar starts to get infused with these things. All right, so we have our pie tin. So now that we have our 4 ingredients, we're going to pour it in the pie tin. And back to the water here, we have our cookie tray underneath. We do want to add water to the bottom of the pan. This is a water bath. This will help prevent it from scorching on the bottom and the sides as we cook this. Now, we go to our 300-degree oven. We take our pan and very, very gently throw it in the oven. Once it's in, I like to set a timer for about 15 minutes. Now, this is not the time it takes to cook, but we want to check on this momentarily. This is actually going to take about 45 minutes. All right. So when that timer goes off for the first 45 minutes, this is when I want to rotate it, because remember, this is convection. So we don't have the fan circulating the air. And also give it a little bit of a tap. If you see those little rings that jiggle into the center, it's not done. And then you can put it back and set the timer for another 15 minutes and then check it again. You do want it ever so slightly jiggly, but it does going to take about 45 minutes. So with the magic of television, poof, you take it out of the oven, you let it cool. All right. This one is set for a little bit, so it doesn't have this jingle, but now we've made our custard with that candy cap infusion of the heavy cream. So why do we want to make this a creme brulee at this point? We're going to take our candy cap infused sugar. Oop, that pot's not supposed to be in there. And with that strainer, we can get the sugar out of it. Because this is the sugar that we're going to want to be bruleeing on the top. There we go there. So these candy caps, again, are still good. They're going to go back into my container of infused sugar. And we'll save this for a later date. Now here with the sugar, we want to take a little bit and sprinkle it on the top. And we also want to coat it evenly and dust it. So as you shake this and spin this around, it'll start to coat. And we do want it to coat evenly. That's it. So last step, our custard is cooked. We have our infused sugar on the top. We grab our blowtorch. And we start to caramelize the sugar. Do not leave the flame in one spot for too long, or you will risk burning it. And any granules that you see from the sugar, that actual granulation, you do not want that. So make sure you touch the torch to it just a little bit. And me personally, my creme brulees, I like my custard a little bit warm, all right? Oh my goodness. There's my timer for it being done. So I do just put it in the oven for a few minutes because I like to serve it warm. And the last step to making a creme brulee, you take your spoon and you really want that crust to crack. Okay, that's my impromptu creme brulee recipe. Sorry about that fire alarm going off in that last bit. I hope you heard the end. That's it.
Yeah, that was lovely, Spike. And I'm sure we all love the crack of the creme brulee. I mean, is that not what we all look forward to at the end of a meal? I definitely will.
Spike, I'm gonna have to send you more candy caps because I want to see more recipes like that. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
No, seriously, I was just going to double down on your comment in the chat that it's quite amazing Spike can do all this one-handed. I mean,
That is why I showed you that little towel trick, because in the kitchen, a lot of times I have something in my hand and, tonight it just happened to be a phone. So,
well, I and the fact that you rolled this out, I mean, you only got this idea, what, an hour ago? And somehow you have a creme brulee ready to go already? I don't even understand.
I had some stuff lying around,
You just have a massive amount of 40% cream lying around. All right, fair enough, man. Well, thank you again. If anyone requires Spike's Instagram and YouTube, I did already post it, but I'm happy to post it again. He gave 2 recipes, so I might as well give a shout out to Spike a second time. So that kind of concludes the recipe component of this webinar. We are running mildly behind time, but that's okay. We're happy to answer questions now. All of us are available to answer questions. We do have a few in the Q&A section, so I'll get to those first. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them. You can post them in the chat. You can post them in the Q&A section. Whatever works for you guys. So the first one, I guess, Spike, this is over to you because it's how did that apple crisp taste? And I've always cooked matsutake as part of an Asian dish. This is not obviously particularly Asian dish. So how did it taste?
So it was very good. That was the second time that I've ever eaten matsutake, and that was the first time I ever really used them in a recipe beyond just like searing them and throwing them on something. So I was very impressed because I love apple crisp, especially since it's been getting nice and cool here in New England. And the texture of those mushrooms inside the apple crisp was very nice. It was between the hot mushiness, if I can use that word, of the apple and that crispy toastness of the nuts and the oats that were on the top. And so it kind of added this balance from a texture point of view in the center, which was very nice. And that red hot flavoring, like really, I'm not sure if it was the hot tamales in my head, but it really stood out to go against the apples there. So it wasn't really it was too sweet with a little hint of cinnamon, like that spicy cinnamon, which was really nice. I hope that answers your questions.
Lovely, I think so. Julie, did I answer your question? I assume so. All right, next one is from Cliff. Are there aromas that are more likely to dissipate with cooking? I find that if I saute fruity smelling mushrooms like chanterelles or bicolor leeks, that I'm more likely to lose that aroma as opposed to steaming or poaching them. Any thoughts on this, guys?
That's the whole panel.
Well, do you think there's any aromas that you're more likely to lose when you're cooking them, or specific methods?
There's aromas of things that change. I find when you cook things. So going into smelly mushrooms, my favorite smelling mushroom here in the Northeast is Cortinarius corrugus, the corrugated Cortinarius with the purple gills. It has this very chocolatey aroma to me when it's fresh. When I collect them, if I dry them in a dehydrator, my whole room smells like this, and it's like this very rich aroma to me. But I find that when I cook with it, it turns more floral versus that sweet chocolatedness. So just cooking them, even after drying them, after collecting them, throwing them into a dish adds a different level for a flavor profile than really what my nose senses in the field. So that is one thing to note on aromas with one mushroom, that it can be obscured, especially with other ingredients that you mix it with. You can take it into different directions, so it does change.
Gordon, any thoughts? You're on mute.
Can you repeat the question to me? I was deep in a hole reading up on farinaceous aromas.
Aromas. Are there aromas that are more likely to dissipate with cooking?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, something like a truffle, you generally don't cook truffles, right? You just sort of shave them on at the very last second so that the aroma doesn't totally dissipate. And then I think there's other things, you know, like a candy cap, the soda has to do with the volatility of a molecule. So a lot of the stuff that's in a truffle can disappear very quickly with heat, but compounds like lactones, like vanillin and sotalon, that's in maple and candy caps, tends to stick around for a long time. And so that's also what you get out of like toasted wood in a barrel. And those compounds, no matter how old or whiskey or wine gets, you can still taste the oak. So those things stick around a long time. Whereas fruity compounds like esters or something like that would disappear from a wine very quickly. So certainly you usually drink white wines pretty young because the esters and the thiols will disappear, but you might let a red wine age for a long time. So when it comes to cooking mushrooms, it's sort of just experience. You know, I do things with Matsutake where I've shaved it on raw because I like that fresh aroma. I've also done things where I cook them into like a rice dish, but you have it like a closed container where it's sort of steaming the aroma through the food. And you can even do the thing where you have the cooked version and then also shave some fresh stuff on top to kind of get all the different layers of the flavor. When it comes to, you know, chanterelles and lobsters and boletes and a lot of other sort of edible mushrooms, I'm definitely on the side of just cooking the crap out of your mushrooms. I don't think you can really overcook a mushroom, and the flavor of it's gonna be there. You know, something like a black trumpet still tastes like a black trumpet whether you cooked it for 5 minutes or 50 minutes, in my experience. So I do think there might be certain things if you're trying to maximize, you know, like the fruitiness of a chanterelle, maybe you could try cooking a little bit less, but I think it's probably you're safer cooking it more and developing the flavor more. I saw Spike make a face. What you have thoughts?
I'm just reading the comments going by. I'm not that tech savvy. Somebody said they can hear you but only see me. I'm not sure.
Okay, should be fine now, I think.
There's a master controller behind the scenes somewhere.
Yeah, that's me. Sometimes I forget. Sorry, guys. Hopefully it's safe now. Right.
It is safe to use Matsutake raw. Someone asked. Yeah, I wouldn't eat like a lot of mushrooms. You can eat some raw. There's things you shouldn't eat raw, like shiitake, chicken of the woods, morels, even oyster mushrooms. Don't eat those raw. But a lot of the ones you can eat a little bit raw and not have a problem. And Matsutake is especially one that people like to shave on fresh, and you can eat, you know, at least half a mushroom without getting any stomach upset.
There was also a question on using Clavariadelphis truncatus instead of candy caps.
Oh, the sweetness was that mushroom is very sweet. It's a protein sweetness though, so it doesn't necessarily get caramelized like sugar. And I know there's a company in the Bay Area that's exploring using that protein from mushrooms, which it conveys a sense of sweetness. And I ate a lot in Colorado this summer. It's delicious, but it doesn't have any dessert-like aroma in the same way. It's just sweet, but still tastes like a mushroom. So candy caps are smell sweet because they're mapley and we associate that with sweetness, but candy caps don't actually have any sugar in them, so they aren't sweet. So if you want them to be sweet, you add them to sugar stuff, and if you want them to be savory, you add them to like pork or a curry, and then you're going to get that more like fenugreek thing going on. So I wouldn't sub candy caps for Clavariadelphis, although I think together they might make an awesome combination because then you'd be getting both the sweetness from the smell and the sweetness on the tongue or the flavor from both mushroom components.
Sounds like a future recipe in store. Well, on the topic of on the candy cups and sugar, Alice did ask a question. So, do you infuse sugar with cooked candy caps, or can you use dried raw mushrooms? And subsequent question is, can the sugar be consumed without cooking, like adding it to a coffee, if you use raw candy caps?
So they're not raw. They've been dried generally. I know with Julie, I've taken like candy caps and blitzed them into sugar, and then you can sprinkle them on top of a muffin or even almost like a brulee kind of thing, but you might not want to burn the mushroom. Most of the time when I've used candy cap type sugar stuff, I end up putting it in something that gets a little bit of heat. I don't think it would be bad for you to put it in coffee, but usually if I'm going to put candy caps in coffee, I make a syrup out of it, and I just do 2-to-1 sugar to water, bring it to boil, and then throw a handful of candy caps in and let them infuse and pull them out and toss them in the freezer to do them again. You can also keep a bunch of candy caps in like a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of rum and then use that to infuse into stuff. And that's safe to do. But again, I've used that for a drink, and I've never had, like, I think that the drying thing with a Lactarius rubidus is, would get rid of anything you'd be worried about. And I'm sure you can eat a raw candy cap, but you can also cook them fresh and eat them.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think, oh, sorry, one more thing. What Spike was doing is I think smart too, because like he wasn't freezing them, but getting them wet like that and then putting them in sugar will help them hydrate and make the flavor much stronger. Because candy caps need to be wet to kind of they transfer their flavor much more easily to liquids than they do to fats. So unlike a truffle, which would infuse into fats well, candy caps are going to infuse better into like alcohol and liquids. And so to get candy cap sugar to really stink like candy cap, I think doing a quick little boil and then throw them into sugar like Spike did is going to help make the aroma more pervasive into that sugar, just as like a phase transfer thing. Sorry, I'm done now.
All good. Well, we got another question for you. So Tina has asked, I have no problem finding Matsutake. However, they've never been able to smell them. I like using them because they have a nice texture. Why can I not smell them?
I've certainly run into differentiations of like ones that smell more or less, but if you're completely nose blind to Matsutake, maybe there's certain, I don't know, can you smell everything else totally fine? Are you sure it's absolutely Matsutake? Because to me, that is one of the core defining features of Matsutake, is that it smells that way. Can you smell other mushroom aromas? I'm not totally sure, because it's like your subjective experience as to whether or not you can smell something is your experience. I don't have a good reason for it other than maybe you're nose blind to something like that, or maybe you're not hunting Matzies that have a very strong aroma. Maybe it's a different Tricholoma species that's very similar. I'm not sure.
We did get a chat question on where to get some candy caps, and they haven't found them in Manitoba or Northwest Ontario. As someone from Ontario, I will say that it is very difficult for us to get candy caps. I do not think they grow around here. I've never seen them. I believe, are they West Coast? At least predominantly, or
Yes, there is a candy cap version like Camphoratus or something like that that's on the East Coast that some people collect and say they can have a relatively strong smell. I've smelled things on the East Coast that smelled very strong of candy cap when fresh, and then when I dried them, they lost all their aroma and it didn't come back in the way that the West Coast ones do. But I was about to say you can buy them online from a place like Far West Fungi. And they have a lot of different foragers that source to them, and many different like mushroom places will often have a little bag of candy caps, but they usually sell out on like a yearly basis because they're so popular. So if you get some, you don't need a lot, though. They are very strong.
Yeah, we do have a candy cap group, as Gordon mentioned. I call them the Camphoratus group. Depending on where you are, there's a bunch of them in those liked areas. But when you cook them, they do release that aroma. You can infuse them in desserts. They do taste good. They're great edibles, but they are nothing except they drop in the lake of that flavor that the West Coast ones do. So if you really want to play with them for their, strong flavor, I would suggest meeting someone like Dr. Walker.
Brooke did add that we have in northern Wisconsin, there's a large, very mapley kind of Lactaria species found mostly in sphagnum birch bogs, but it's usually too buggy to deal with. I feel like that's pretty common up here. Another question for Gordon. Famous Gordon. I've always thought, this is from Ethan, I've always thought Farinaceous is an overused descriptor for any mushroom species, which doesn't align with the specific odor. anything from watermelon rind to baked bread. Are there any molecules that have been attributed to this odor descriptor? Are there any edible mushrooms that feature this odor?
So I mean, I just did a quick dive into like, I searched farinaceous aroma compound, and there wasn't a quick answer. But what I can say is I think the bigger confusion here is that farinaceous basically means it's supposed to smell like starch. That's the Latin root of farin, is the starch kind of thing. So to me, when I describe or think about farinaceous, I think of like the smell of oatmeal, or freshly milled flour. It's a very kind of grainy type of thing, and it almost like you're in like a grain silo, evocative of that kind of smell. And there are a lot of misuses of this because people start calling.
Headphone died. All right, I'm on computer audio. Sorry.
There you go.
Can you still hear me? Yes.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, I can no longer hear you. Doesn't matter. Sometimes they say it's like towards cucumbery, and then that confuses things because then people start also saying that farinaceous is a lot of stuff that farinaceous is not, and this is more to do with like terminology, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to put it like in my aroma wheel and try to like hopefully define it a little bit more. But again, with that subjective perception of smell is really hard because one person can say, well, this to me smells like grains. Another person says, well, to me, this smells like watermelon rinds or cucumber. And you're like, well, you're both kind of right, and it's really difficult to like draw a hard line. And even when it comes to that kind of thing, an aroma like farinaceous might be the overlap of a lot of different compounds. And the concentration of those compounds is how that impacts like our perception of that thing. So I will keep looking, but at least from a quick Google search, I didn't see, sometimes you say, what is the smell of rose? You're like, oh, it's, there's a rose compound. You can look up the phenylacetate or whatever that is, like the rose smell, whereas something like farinaceous might be a lot more complicated and it's a little bit harder to tease apart what's in there.
We have a last question here to round out our Q&A section. This one is from Alice. So the fruity apricot odor that is often attributed to the chanterelles, in Alice's experience, in any case, and honestly in mine as well, the odor tends to kind of get stronger for a while after harvesting the mushrooms. Why is that? Oh, you can't hear me.
He can't hear you.
You're asking me. Sorry. I have no idea. I was just gonna say the compound, and this is I was searching extensively on the web to try to figure out what is that fruity smell in chanterelles. There's got to be a compound behind that because I looked for the cucumber smell, and that was a difficult one because trying to tease apart cucumber and farinaceous turned out to not be. I was like, I'll just have an easy answer for that, and after like 3 days, I was like, I can't find shit. So the chanterelle one is what is it? Dihydroactinonolide. I don't know how to say that. Anyhow, it's in Hal's book. It's in the nosedive book, and it's in chapter 13 or 14. And maybe he talks a little bit more about concentration type thing. My guess would be that there's a concentration effect that happens because I very, very subtly percept that fruity aroma in a chanterelle. Only the East Coast ones. I do not get it off our West Coast ones. And so I've been like, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there's a little bit of apricot, Play-Doh kind of smell when I'm out in the woods. And then I put them in a bag and I put them in my car. And then I go in to get some, a beer or something, come back to my car. And then I'm like, holy crap, this is like apricots and Play-Doh because it's been sitting in my car, filling up that little bit of airspace in a car with all of the aroma coming off the chanterelles. So I think that's part of why it seems like it gets more intense because you're just concentrating a lot of them together and then they're filling that little airspace with a lot of that molecule.
Now, could it be that, for a lot of vegetables and stuff, as we cut them, for example, I'm thinking onions, but, it could be anything, right? Where the knife sliced through something, you're breaking through some cells, it releases some of these volatile chemicals, right? So you have, but as we know with mushrooms, they can bruise pretty easily as well, right? So, we just manhandling mushrooms in a way also, is basically damaging some of these cells. Could that not be then releasing some of these odors?
Yes, definitely. Like any amount of damaging a cell thing is going to release whatever's inside the cell. And a lot of things smell as a like a defense mechanism. And again, we're sort of assuming that a lot of these mushroom aromas might be keyed into like attract animals, and that might be some of it, but there may be some that are there to like potentially repel an animal as well. And so, you know, the bluing of a bolete happens when the cells are damaged, and that might be like an antioxidant type thing. So there's potential that maybe releasing some sort of strong aroma or odor might deter an animal from eating a mushroom. Although I think in our case, we're like, oh, that smells good. I want more of that. Which might also be the intent of the mushroom too. We don't know. It's kind of hard to ask them questions. They don't have mouths.
Okay. So we've run out of questions right on time. We're 2 minutes past our deadline here. So are there any final thoughts from anyone, any of our panelists? Or any quick questions from anyone to round this out? It has to be a quick question if you have a question. No? 3, 2, 1. All right, great. All right, fantastic. So Gordon's still chiming in the
Really
chat.
said one thing about any take homes from the Aroma Wheel, and the take home would be use it. I hope it's useful, and maybe it's a starting place to start developing a language about the smells of mushrooms. And there's some examples, but I just wanted to put out one that was a little bit more like cleaned up. And there's a lot of stuff I missed, and if there's things you think should be on there, tell me, and I'll see if I can put them in the footnotes of the book.
Lovely. So I want to thank everyone, and especially our panelists, for putting in some time and effort into this. I have just dropped in a link to our culinary committee. We're always looking for people to join. So if you're interested in the culinary and mycophagy, and you would like to join the committee, I'm sure we'd be happy. Our fearless leader, Julie, will be happy to greet you and welcome you into the group. And we meet once every 2 weeks on Mondays. So you can join us and see what you want to do. Again, reminder: Mycofile, great episode, great quarterly has gone out. So be sure to go check that out as well. And that's it, guys. So thank you again. Thank you, our panelists. Thank you to all of you who have attended. We do this for you. We hope that you have enjoyed this. And we look forward to giving you another webinar in early 2025. So thank you, everyone, and have an excellent evening.